Reports from Order Malleus strike teams confirm escalating encounters with Daemon Primarch affiliated entities beyond Angron himself. Shadowy warlords and possessed champions led fanatical warbands, employing unorthodox tactics and demonic sorcery to undermine Imperial defences. These leaders often acted independently, suggesting fractured command within the enemy ranks, but also increasing unpredictability. The Grey Knights' role in combating these threats was pivotal, yet their precise operations were often obscured from other Imperial forces to maintain operational security. Inquisitorial operatives encountered numerous instances where Loyalist units were compromised from within. Mutinies and sudden desertions increased markedly, often coinciding with unexplained psychic phenomena disrupting command and control. Several regiments disappeared entirely, only to be rediscovered days later operating under Chaos banners or decimated by unknown forces. These occurrences highlight the pervasive psychological and warp-based warfare conducted by the enemy, complicating efforts to mount coordinated defense. In conclusion, the official Administratum and Adeptus Mechanicus accounts present the First War for Armageddon as a costly yet ultimately successful defense of an Imperial world against a significant demonic incursion. The narrative emphasizes order restored, resources committed, and the triumph of Imperial institutions despite overwhelming odds. However, the records acknowledge that many operational details remain classified or lost, reflecting the sensitive nature of the conflict and the continued threat posed by Chaos forces. Inside the Daemon Primarch Angron, the former Primarch of the World Eaters stood at the head of a fractured legion seeking reunion. Though it is believed he orchestrated the return of his scattered warbands, warped fate rather than strategy drove the Hulk toward Armageddon. Such an arrival signaled not only violence, but the unravelling of order that had held for centuries. Internal communications reveal bitter disputes between the Inquisition and Adeptus Administratum over information control and operational jurisdiction. Inquisitorial demands for increased authority and rapid response clashed with Administratum's insistence on strict chain-of-command protocols and record sanitization. The tension resulted in fractured command structures, confusion on the battlefield, and compromised coordination among Loyalist forces. These conflicts exacerbated the suffering of planetary defenders and hindered efforts to stem the tide of chaos corruption. Post-conflict assessments by the Adeptus Mechanicus highlight the extensive environmental damage inflicted by prolonged warp activity and mechanized warfare. Surface geology exhibits signs of significant alteration, including warped terrain and residual warp taint pockets requiring ongoing remediation. Many Hive City districts remain uninhabitable, with reconstruction efforts projected to span multiple decades. The Administratum records an official estimate of civilian casualties exceeding several hundred million, emphasizing the profound social impact of the conflict. The arrival of the Space Wolves chapter is logged at Day 6 of the invasion. Administratum chronologies describe their deployment pattern as immediate and concentrated, with strike forces descending directly into contested Hive cities. Their primary objectives included stabilizing defensive lines and preventing the complete collapse of critical infrastructure. Adeptus Mechanicus field reports from this period indicate rapid retrofitting of existing industrial machinery to support the war effort, converting production from civilian goods to munitions and armor plating. Portable power cores were reallocated from deep mining operations to support less gun manufactories and void shield relays. The official record confirms the banishment of Angron during this engagement, though it provides limited detail on the methods employed, citing operational security and classification restrictions. The war diary notes the sacrifice of numerous elite units, including the near annihilation of Grey Knights contingents and significant losses within Space Wolves battle companies. The Administratum underscores that the victory was achieved through coordinated Imperial resolve despite heavy casualties. In response, Grey Knights teleportation operatives inserted Terminator cadres directly into Angron's midst. 109 teleporting warriors materialized amid blood-spattered ruins where demons fumed. Greeting them were 12 bloodthirsters. A brutal psychic clash erupted, Angron slaughtered 5 with a single swing of his black blade, shifting hope into horror. Only when Hyperion, a young psychic adept, shattered that black blade did the tide imperfectly shift. The high point of the enemy advance occurred in the 3rd month, when the World Eaters succeeded in breaching the outer defences of Hive Death Mire. Administratum timelines record 28 hours of continuous fighting within the lower industrial districts before Imperial forces, led by Space Wolves elements, forced a counter-retreat. Adeptus Mechanicus after-action analyses attribute the successful defence to concentrated melter fire against enemy armour columns, coordinated with precise artillery support from remaining orbital platforms. On the battlefield, coordinated strikes targeted key chaos concentrations in Hive Hell's Reach and Hive Death Mire. Mechanicus field reports describe the deployment of experimental void shield generators and graviton field emitters to bolster defensive positions and disrupt enemy advances. Imperial artillery barrages supported by orbital bombardments systematically dismantled enemy fortifications and warp-infused structures. However, these offensives often triggered unpredictable demonic reactions, leading to localized breaches and counterattacks. Imperial logistics efforts intensified to unprecedented levels during this phase. Supply convoys, both orbital and surface-bound, operated under strict security protocols to mitigate disruption from remaining enemy forces and warp-related interference. Adeptus Mechanicus engineers oversaw rapid refurbishment of damaged vehicles and weapon systems, while specialized fabrication facilities produced additional war material to replace losses. The Administratum notes that despite these efforts, attrition rates remained high, with many units operating below half strength. Finally, the archives shed light on post-war purges and cleansing operations that extended well beyond the cessation of open hostilities. These actions targeted not only known heretics, but also entire communities deemed tainted by association or exposure. The moral implications of these campaigns remain subject to internal debate, though they are portrayed within the Inquisition as necessary sacrifices to ensure the Imperium's survival against insidious corruption. Administratum records also note tensions arising between Imperial organizations involved in the war effort. Conflicts between the Inquisition, Adeptus Mechanicus, and Space Wolves command structures are acknowledged but not elaborated upon. These internal disagreements influence post-war policy decisions and ongoing governance of Armageddon. The Space Wolves retained responsibility for planetary defense, operating under increased scrutiny from the Adeptus Administratum and other Imperial authorities. Brother Captain Taramar Aurelian, driven by sacrifice, plunged forward, striking Angron with concentrated psychic might. The Demon Prince was banished into the warp for 100 Terran years and a day. In that moment, demons roared and fled, cultists and mutants scattered under ballistic fire. Only 13 Grey Knights emerged alive from the psychic crucible. Their costs were immense, but the world endured, saved by determination and grim valor. The outcome of the war stood as a Pyrrhic Imperial victory. Armageddon was saved, but revealed to millions the secret of chaos. That truth became more dangerous than any invasion. As soon as order returned, the Inquisition enacted a brutal solution. All who fought, except Space Marines, were rounded up. They endured sterilization injections and were forced into labor until death. Survivors were erased, replaced by colonists ignorant of the primal conflict. The Inquisition thoroughly suppressed knowledge of the war. Even Armageddon's own citizens believed only 2 wars occurred there. The Inquisition also uncovered evidence of attempts by corrupt Adeptus Mechanicus factions to exploit the war for arcane experimentation. Some Forge worlds allegedly experimented with demon-infused technologies and unholy integration of warp energies into machine spirits. These activities, while providing short-term tactical advantages, contributed to widespread mechanical failures and catastrophic malfunctions. Inquisitorial investigations into such breaches resulted in the destruction of several experimental facilities and the execution of implicated tech priests, underscoring the delicate balance between technological advancement and heretical contamination. The Space Wolves maintained a rotating presence at the most threatened sectors, their warriors shifting from one embattled wall to another in rapid redeployments. This tactic prevented the enemy from concentrating their strength at a single point for long. Meanwhile, the Grey Knights continued their covert strikes deep within chaos-held zones, targeting warp rifts and annihilating demonic manifestations before they could swell into uncontrollable infestations. These missions often required precise timing to coincide with defensive counterattacks, creating windows in which Imperial forces could reclaim ground and fortify new positions. The mid-phase of the First War for Armageddon, as recorded in inquisitorial dossiers, exposes a conflict rife with subterfuge and the unseen machinations of chaos. Classified reports reveal that demon infestations expanded beyond frontline battle zones into previously secure hive sectors, facilitated by covert cult networks embedded deep within Armageddon's civilian population. These cults exploited desperation and fear, recruiting from disaffected workers and militia who had witnessed the relentless destruction around them. The Inquisition also documents unconfirmed and speculative reports regarding the true nature of Angron's banishment. While official records attribute his removal to Grey Knight's intervention, some dossiers suggest darker rituals and arcane technologies were employed in secret. It is believed that these efforts involved collaboration with the Adeptus Mechanicus' more esoteric factions, though such cooperation remains unacknowledged in open records. The suppressed narratives hint at the existence of forbidden knowledge and dangerous experimentation underlying the war's conclusion. The Inquisition's records on the First War for Armageddon provide a substantially different narrative from the official accounts maintained by the Adeptus Administratum and Adeptus Mechanicus. These archives reveal suppressed details, internal conflicts, and grim realities that the broader Imperium sought to conceal. The earliest classified reports indicate that the scale of chaos infiltration and demon presence far exceeded public acknowledgement, with entire regiments corrupted or annihilated without formal mention in open records. Psychological operations formed a significant component of the Inquisition's strategy. Propaganda efforts aimed at both loyalist and chaos-occupied populations sought to undermine enemy morale and encourage defection where possible. However, these efforts faced challenges due to the pervasive influence of warp corruption, which distorted communication channels and fueled paranoia. Inquisitorial psychers played a critical role in countering these effects, using specialized disciplines to detect and neutralize subversive psychic transmissions. The archives document sustained inquisitorial campaigns extending decades beyond the war, aimed at purging these lingering threats. These operations involved specialized Ordo Malleus teams, equipped with advanced demon hunting technologies and supported by Adeptus Mechanicus ritualists. Their missions often required entry into quarantined zones declared lost by conventional military forces operating in near-total secrecy. Casualty rates for these prolonged campaigns were high, and many operatives never returned, their fates recorded only as missing in action. By the start of the fourth month, reinforcement fleets from the Segmentum Solar began to arrive in significant numbers. Administrator Manifest lists several Imperial Navy battle groups, additional Astra Militarum regiments, and support contingents from Forge Worlds within transit range. The Adeptus Mechanicus initiated large-scale repair operations on damaged orbital defences, while also deploying Skitarii maniples to reinforce ground positions. This influx of manpower and resources allowed Imperial forces to transition from defensive containment to limited counteroffensives. The Inquisition's files detail numerous clashes between their agents and planetary defense authorities over methods and priorities. Inquisitors insisted on aggressive purging of suspected cultist populations and immediate containment of warp rifts, often advocating for scorched earth tactics. Military commanders, bound by strict doctrine and concern for civilian infrastructure, frequently resisted these proposals, resulting in delays and operational conflicts. This bureaucratic friction hindered the timely elimination of critical threats, allowing demon incursions to intensify. The human cost documented within the Inquisition's records is staggering. Beyond battlefield casualties, psychological trauma and cultural disintegration plagued surviving populations. Numerous hive sectors exhibited widespread signs of social collapse, including breakdowns in governance, crime surges, and rampant xenophobia fueled by fear of hidden cultists. In response, the Inquisition instituted prolonged surveillance and control measures, embedding agents within local administrations to preempt resurgence of chaos influence. Within the Space Wolves command circle, discussions turned to the probability of confronting Angron in direct combat. The Great Wolf recognized the danger, but understood that his warrior's presence would be essential to containing the wider threat while the Grey Knights executed their objective. The Wolves prepared by reinforcing their forward strike elements with veteran packs, arming them with weapons optimized for close-quarters combat against heavily armored and augmented foes. This redeployment came at the expense of holding certain defensive lines, a choice that would soon prove costly. Mechanicus battlefield logs note significant degradation of planetary infrastructure during this period. Warp corruption spread through the upper atmosphere, causing severe interference with Auspex sweeps and rendering orbital precision strikes unreliable in contaminated sectors. Power grid integrity fell below optimal operating thresholds in 3 hive clusters, necessitating emergency deployment of fusion generators salvaged from deep mantle excavation rigs. Several of these improvised power units failed under combat stress, resulting in loss of shield coverage and subsequent enemy penetrations into defensive perimeters. The sanctioned record closes this phase with a description of the Imperial position as stabilized but costly. Hive cities remained under siege, and vast sectors of the planet were designated permanent quarantine zones. While the Administratum text presents this outcome as strategically sustainable, embedded data tables show unprecedented resource expenditure and attrition rates. Preparations for a final coordinated offensive are mentioned, but details are withheld for classification reasons. The Grey Knights maintained operational secrecy, but their effect on the battlefield was acknowledged indirectly. Administratum's statistics show sudden stabilization in sectors previously considered untenable following their deployment. While no explicit correlation is made in the public record, Mechanicus notations reference the abrupt drop in warp energy readings in those same sectors within hours of their arrival. Standard Imperial forces were ordered to secure these zones immediately afterward, allowing for partial restoration of supply chains and recovery of wounded personnel. In summation, the Inquisition's perspective on the First War for Armageddon reveals a multifaceted conflict marked by administrative failure, covert warfare, and brutal suppression. The hidden records underscore the complexities and moral ambiguities inherent in combating the forces of chaos. Unlike the sanitized Administratum account, the Inquisition's archives offer a more comprehensive, though unsettling understanding of a war that shaped Armageddon's history beneath the layers of official silence. The final phase of the First War for Armageddon saw Imperial forces executing a concerted counteroffensive designed to reclaim lost territory and sever the enemy's foothold on the planet. Administratum strategic communiques detail the coordinated timing of this operation to coincide with the predicted weakening of warp instability based on Mechanicus warp monitoring data. The assault involved combined arms from Astra Militarum regiments, Space Wolves contingents, and limited Grey Knight support, though the latter's specific role remains classified in full detail. On Armageddon itself, upheaval already stirred amid food shortages and warp storms. Half a dozen hive cities erupted into rebellion, lit by cultists stirring dissent amid chaos. The planetary defense forces contained insurgency in Armageddon Secundus swiftly, but on Armageddon Prime, the widely scattered hives proved more resistant to suppression. Communications faltered under warp interference, preventing reinforcements from arriving. Imperial command initially misread unrest as civil strife, not an invasion. This tragic misjudgment gave chaos hours to entrench. When the Devourer descended and disgorged wave upon wave of world eaters, mutants, demon hosts and heretics, the planetary defenders faltered. Chaos taint spread insidiously through betrayals. Nearly half the planetary defense force defected under twisted influence. loyal units collapsed. Armageddon Prime fell into brutal submission. Survivors retreated into jungle and ash, regrouping near the rivers Styx and Charon with remnants from Secundus. Desperation and resolve intertwined as they rallied for a last defence. For the civilians who remained under Imperial control, life became a constant cycle of endurance. Rations were reduced to the bare minimum, work rotations were extended, and any hint of dissent was met with immediate reprisal. Entire sectors of hive cities were sealed off to contain potential cult activity, forcing residents to live in cramped, unlit spaces with minimal sanitation. Despite these hardships, many continued to labour in munitions factories and medical stations, driven by a shared understanding that their survival depended on the defence holding. This grim solidarity, though uncelebrated, was as crucial to the war effort as any military manoeuvre. The arrival of the Space Wolves altered more than just morale. Their unique fighting style meshed unexpectedly well with Armageddon's defensive needs. In the jungles, their tracking skills allowed them to intercept enemy movements before they reached critical supply lines. In the ash wastes, they favoured sudden, devastating strikes that withdrew before retaliation could be organised. In the hive cities, they moved with disciplined ferocity, clearing block by block with surgical precision. The presence of the Great Wolf and his veterans also served as a visible counterweight to Angron's terrifying presence, providing a psychological anchor for defenders facing overwhelming odds. The First War for Armageddon is recorded in the Adeptus Administratum's compiled annals as commencing in Millennia 41, year 941. The earliest official entries describe the planetary situation as stable, with Hive Primus, Hive Hell's Reach, and other major population centres operating at standard industrial output. No anomalies in production quotas or population trends were reported in the fiscal audits of the preceding decades. Administratum scribes note that Armageddon's location along major warp routes made it a consistent logistical hub for Imperial naval and ground operations, with a population exceeding several billion and a functioning planetary defence force numbering in the low millions. The Grey Knight's arrival was timed with deliberate precision, coordinated through astropathic relay despite the interference of the warp. They deployed not in large, sweeping movements, but in surgical, high-risk insertions into areas where demonic presence was thickest. Each appearance was an act of targeted annihilation, purging warp-spawned entities before they could spread corruption further. Their actions bought time for the larger defence to reorganise and consolidate, though the toll on the knights themselves was severe. Even among the Imperium's most elite, the strain of prolonged engagement with the warp's horrors was evident. Angron himself pressed the thrust. He led his elite guard, the Crua Praetoria, including bloodthirster champions, personally across the Styx toward Hive Infernus and Hell's Reach. Their strike fractured defence, yet the defenders held a grim line. Then, meticulously, Grimnar signalled for the Grey Knights. Only those chosen and elite could confront demonic horror directly. The closing chapter of the Inquisition's records reveals the enduring and complex consequences of the First War for Armageddon that remain obscured from public knowledge. Even after the apparent banishment of Angron and the cessation of large-scale hostilities, numerous warp phenomena persisted, indicating that chaos influence had embedded deeply within the planet's fabric. These residual effects manifested as localized rifts, spontaneous demon spawns, and destabilized geophysical conditions that continually challenged Imperial remediation efforts. By this stage of the war, morale was a fragile resource. Rumours of Angron's direct involvement spread quickly among the defenders, even as the Inquisition sought to suppress such information. Stories of his immense stature, his unnatural speed, and his ability to crush armoured vehicles with his bare hands eroded confidence in isolated units. Countering this psychological warfare became as important as repelling physical assaults. Commanders arranged for visible victories, publicly broadcasting images of chaos war machines destroyed or cities recaptured, to remind the population that the enemy could be beaten. Preparations for this operation reshaped the defensive landscape. Entire sectors were intentionally abandoned to lure chaos forces toward predetermined kill zones. Artillery and heavy weapon emplacements were repositioned for concentrated fire support, even if it meant leaving other regions vulnerable. Civilians in these zones were evacuated when possible, though many were left behind, their fate uncertain. Such sacrifices underscored the grim calculus of a war where every gain demanded an equal or greater cost elsewhere. Within the command ranks, there was no illusion about the risks involved, but the alternative, allowing Angron to consolidate his hold, was unacceptable. Meanwhile, the Inquisition's purge triggered conflict with the Space Wolves. Logan Grimnar stood against the purge, launching ships to shield refugees. Inquisitorial forces attacked in orbit, resulting in battle over Fenris. Inquisitor Lord Gesmi Kisneros perished. Ultimately, factional tensions cooled enough for compromise. The Space Wolves never forgave the Inquisition, remaining vigilant against its designs. Yet despite these advantages, the enemy's numbers and ferocity continued to press the Imperium toward collapse. Angron's warbands, bolstered by endless cultist reinforcements, struck with no regard for their own survival. They were supported by demon engines and corrupted war machines, whose designs blended the brutality of the World Eaters with blasphemous Mechanicus heresy. These constructs tore through defences with terrifying speed, ignoring wounds that would cripple conventional armour. For the defenders, halting even a single such machine required concentrated fire from multiple heavy weapons teams, often at the cost of their own positions. Every defensive victory was purchased with irreplaceable resources and lives. In the aftermath, Titans' remove diminished. Grey Knights remained under strength. Space Wolves carried guilt and rage, refusing to cede power easily in the future. Records were erased or rewritten by administratum departments, such as the Historical Revision Unit. Many worlds in contact with known survivors faced exterminatus. Even Mechanicus records were cleansed or buried, denying confirmation of Titans used during the invasion. It is believed that humanity forgot or never learned the full scope of the First War. Amid despair, salvation arrived in the form of the Space Wolves' Great Company. Logan Grimnar, the Great Wolf, and his battle-hardened warriors answered astropathic distress calls. They arrived swiftly, bringing leadership and fierce will to a crumbling line. Grimnar's presence galvanized loyalists behind swamp-wreathed entrenchments. Though outnumbered and stretched, Imperial defenders breathed anew with renewed order and belief. Without Grey Knights, the Demon Prince might have breached every gate. The climactic engagement occurred near the River Styx, where Angron's forces concentrated their remaining strength in a last-ditch effort to break the siege. Administratum battlefield logs detail protracted combat spanning multiple standard days, characterized by intense close-quarters fighting and heavy use of demon engines. The Space Wolves led the ground assault under the direct command of Logan Grimnar, applying aggressive tactics aimed at overwhelming enemy warbands. Grey Knights strike teams engaged simultaneously in teleportation insertions behind enemy lines to sever command nodes and disrupt warp conduits. The appearance of the Grey Knights chapter is first entered into administratum records without accompanying operational detail, the notation simply stating Specialist Astartes assets deployed under Order Malleus sanction. No further explanation is provided, and all subsequent references to these forces are classified beyond the standard administratum access level. Adeptus Mechanicus logs from the same period confirm unusual energy readings and environmental stabilization within certain high-threat zones shortly after their arrival, though no official attribution is made. In the aftermath, the administratum implemented comprehensive information control measures. Classified archives were established to regulate access to sensitive materials concerning the war, especially regarding the involvement of Daemon Primarchs and Grey Knights operations. Purge operations targeted suspected Chaos sympathizers among surviving civilians and military personnel, enforcing sterilization protocols and population resettlement programs. These measures aim to restore order while containing knowledge of the conflict's more destabilizing elements. The late stages of the First War for Armageddon saw the strategic balance teetering on collapse. Angron's relentless offensive had driven the defenders into an increasingly compressed perimeter, with only a handful of hive cities still firmly under Imperial control. Hive Hellsreach, already scarred by weeks of sustained siege, became the focal point of the enemy's efforts. Its location near key refinery complexes made it a prime target, and its defenders knew that its loss would fracture the defensive network beyond repair. The outer hive wall bore deep scars from continuous bombardment, and each new breach was sealed with layers of ferrocrete and scrap metal welded under fire. The first confirmed groundfall occurred on the northern continent, within the industrial zone designated Sector Helmar. Administratum records indicate that the World Eater's initial assault was supported by large numbers of mortal chaos cultists and demonic entities, the latter presenting significant interference with Vox and Auspex systems. Casualty projections for the first 48 hours estimate a minimum of 2 million civilian and military dead, though the final figure is believed to be higher. The planetary governor's first transmission to Segmentum Command, dispatched through Astropathic Relay, formally requested the deployment of Astartes forces to supplement the beleaguered planetary defense regiments. At the heart of the invasion lay Angron's unrealized vision of unity. His World Eaters had splintered following the Battle of Scalathrax, devolving into warbands bent on murder and madness. Over 10,000 Terran years, their lust for blood fractured cohesion. They drifted, deadly but disordered, until an unlikely alignment of chaos forces offered them their chance. The Devourer of Stars, massive and erratic, became their vessel for launching a full-scale assault upon the Imperium. Some speculate the Devourer's appearance in Armageddon's orbit occurred at Khorne's whim rather than Angron's design. Administratum records emphasize the continued unpredictability of warp conditions throughout the conflict. Warp storms periodically disrupted reinforcements, supply convoys, and astropathic communication. Mechanicus archivists noted that these storms appeared to coincide with the major enemy assaults, although no definitive causation is established in the official record. Some within the Administratum speculate that the storms were artificially induced, but this is marked as unverified. By the final hours before the operation, Armageddon's night sky was lit by continuous flashes of battle. The sound of distant bombardments rolled across the plains, echoing through the ruins of once thriving districts. Vox traffic was a constant stream of updates, requests and casualty reports, punctuated by orders relayed in clipped, precise language. Every participant in the coming assault understood that the outcome would determine the planet's future. For some, this knowledge brought resolve. For others, it was an unspoken weight pressing heavily on already strained morale. The moment had come when all preparation, sacrifice and endurance would be tested against the might of a Daemon Primarch. As the appointed day approached, enemy activity increased in both scale and intensity. Angron's warbands seemed to sense the shifting tempo, launching attacks with renewed fury. Demonic incursions multiplied, warping the environment and twisting reality itself in localized pockets. In some areas, gravity fluctuated unpredictably, while in others, the air shimmered with waves of unnatural heat. The defenders fought under conditions that defied natural law, relying on the Grey Knight's guidance to navigate these increasingly hazardous zones. Such phenomena took their toll not only physically but mentally, eroding the resolve of even the most disciplined units. In the age just before the hostilities known as the First War for Armageddon, whispers of ancient catastrophe permeated Armageddon's hive cities. These narratives framed successions of calamity and rebellion as inevitable, rooted in chaos rather than natural decay. Just when unrest smouldered, a space hulk emerged in orbit, named the Devourer of Stars, a drifting monstrosity born of warp currents and demon-touched frames. The cost of these operations was severe. The attrition rate among planetary regiments rose sharply, with some units reduced to less than a third of their original strength. Replacements were rare, as reinforcements from off-world were delayed by warp storms and the constant threat of interception by enemy fleets. In many cases, wounded soldiers returned to duty with minimal recovery time, their injuries bound and stabilized just enough to hold a weapon or man a defensive emplacement. The quality of the fighting force inevitably declined, but necessity demanded every available hand at the front. As the First War for Armageddon advanced beyond its initial catastrophic strike, the planet's geography became an unrelenting factor shaping the conflict. Armageddon's surface offered three major environmental zones: the dense equatorial jungles, the ash wastes that stretched for hundreds of miles, and the fortified hive cities perched along vital resource routes. The jungles choked with vegetation, humid air, and ever-present swarms of predatory fauna proved a dangerous ally for defenders who knew their terrain. In the ash wastes, heat shimmered off grey dunes, concealing armoured movement until the moment of impact. Hive cities towering above the surrounding sprawl became both strategic prizes and death traps for those caught in their siege. Inquisition dossiers emphasized the systemic failures that allowed the Chaos Forces to establish a foothold on Armageddon. Despite repeated warnings from local astropaths and sector inquisitors, bureaucratic inertia and administrative denial delayed the full mobilization of Imperial resources. The initial reports of warp anomalies were met with skepticism, delaying deployment of specialist forces such as the Grey Knights and inquisitorial retinues. This lag proved critical, allowing Angron's warbands to coordinate and amplify their demonic influence across the planet. In conclusion, the Inquisition's suppressed archives portray the First War for Armageddon not merely as a military engagement, but as a protracted struggle across multiple dimensions: physical, psychic, and ideological. The true scope of the conflict encompasses hidden atrocities, covert operations, and the relentless shadow of chaos that continues to influence the planet's fate. This understanding challenges sanitized narratives and underscores the ongoing vigilance required to contain the Imperium's darkest enemies. Administratum tactical compilations state that planetary defences responded according to established protocols for invasion readiness. The outer defence stations engaged the incoming fleet within 12 minutes of detection, supported by orbital defence platforms and the Planetary Defence Navy. Losses in the opening engagement were significant. The orbiting stations designated Helios and Bellator were destroyed within the first 30 minutes of sustained contact. Mechanicus assessments attribute this to the enemy's use of combined macro-battery and warp-based weaponry, overwhelming the standard void shield configurations. Surviving defence ships were ordered to retreat to inner orbital positions to protect transport corridors for incoming reinforcements. By the conclusion of the Administratum's first campaign phase entry, the planetary situation is assessed as critical yet not beyond recovery. Defensive operations continued in key hives, supply lines were maintained under constant threat, and strategic plans were initiated for coordinated countermeasures. The record closes with the formal acknowledgement that the conflict had escalated beyond the scope of conventional planetary warfare, entering a category reserved for large-scale demonic incursion and the involvement of traitor Primarch-class entities. The defenders were forced to adapt to each environment with precision. In the jungles, small units navigated using memorized landmarks and relied on short-range Vox relays to avoid detection. In the ash wastes, columns of tanks advanced under cover of dust storms, which masked their approach but also clogged engine intakes and obscured vision. Within the hives, corridors were barricaded with layered defences, each choke point designed to bleed attackers of momentum. Combat doctrine was adjusted daily as the Chaos Forces shifted tactics to exploit environmental weaknesses. This constant adjustment placed immense strain on logistics, forcing the defenders to ration fuel, ammunition, and even purified air. The confirmed presence of a Primarch-class adversary prompted an escalation in strategic planning. Administratum dispatches to Segmentum Command reclassified the conflict from an Astartes-level response to an Ordo Malleus, authorized Demon World-grade engagement. This reclassification allowed for the requisition of unrestricted force deployment, requisition of all available munition stockpiles, and the invocation of emergency tithe levies on surrounding systems. Production quotas on Armageddon itself were doubled. Adeptus Mechanicus overseers reported a 38% increase in industrial output despite continuous enemy raids, achieved through the reallocation of civilian labour and the suspension of all non-military manufacturing. Notably, the Inquisition's archives include unconfirmed but compelling accounts of a failed ritual conducted by Chaos Forces intended to permanently anchor Angron's presence on Armageddon. The ritual's failure, possibly due to intervention by Grey Knights and Mechanicus operatives, resulted in catastrophic backlash, causing extensive environmental damage and localized reality disruptions. While official confirmation remains absent, these events are cited as a major turning point that shifted the war's momentum in favor of Imperial forces. The Inquisition's data also illuminates the role of covert factions operating within the broader war effort. Certain rogue elements within the Adeptus Mechanicus sought to harness the latent energies unleashed during the conflict, risking exposure to forbidden knowledge and corruption. These factions often acted without sanction, conducting experiments that blurred the line between technological innovation and heretical practice. In some cases, these activities resulted in catastrophic failures, including localized warp breaches and the creation of demon-infused war machines subsequently destroyed by Loyalist forces. The Inquisition also maintains files on psychological operations aimed at stabilizing Armageddon's populace post-conflict. These efforts included mass indoctrination campaigns, suppression of forbidden knowledge, and the establishment of extensive surveillance networks. The aim was to prevent the re-emergence of chaos cults and to rebuild fractured civic institutions under Imperial oversight. Nonetheless, these programs faced persistent challenges from deeply ingrained trauma and residual warp contamination, complicating long-term stabilization. The first reference to unusual stellar activity is recorded by the Adeptus Mechanicus survey ships in orbit, 43 standard hours before the initial hostile contact. These reports note warp fluctuations of unknown magnitude, initially attributed to standard storm activity. It was not until the emergence of a large-scale warp breach near the planet's orbital perimeter that the data was reclassified under the highest Mechanicus encryption seals. The breach produced multiple anomalous energy signatures, followed by the immediate translation of non-Imperial vessels into real space. The first confirmed visual record identifies the lead vessel as a heavily modified battle barge bearing the insignia associated with the World Eater's Traitor Legion. Further records expose the discovery of several highly classified artifacts retrieved from Chaos strongholds. These relics exhibited corruptive properties of such magnitude that their destruction required complex rituals involving coordinated efforts between the Inquisition, Mechanicus, and Ecclesiarchy. The exact nature and origin of these artifacts remain undisclosed, though it is believed they were remnants of arcane technology dating back to pre-Imperial ages, or possibly forged through dark pacts with warp entities. The Administratum records describe the midpoint of the First War for Armageddon as beginning with the formal recognition of the enemy commander. Intelligence divisions confirmed the presence of Angron, Daemon Primarch of the World Eaters, on the planetary surface by the 4th week of the campaign. This identification was made through a combination of long-range picked feeds, battlefield sensor logs, and indirect reports from surviving combat units. The Adeptus Mechanicus cross-referenced these findings with archival data on warp energy output associated with known Daemon Primarch manifestations. Recorded energy spikes exceeded previously documented thresholds by 42%, requiring recalibration of multiple Mechanicus monitoring arrays. Covert surveillance logs describe the detection of forbidden artifacts and relics of uncertain origin within Chaos-held zones. The Inquisition prioritized the recovery or destruction of these items, fearing their potential to amplify warp energies and destabilize local realities. Several operations involved infiltration into heavily corrupted hive sectors to seize or neutralize such artifacts, frequently at high cost to involved personnel. These missions remain among the most classified, with limited documentation surviving beyond summary entries. One particularly contentious topic within the archives concerns the Space Wolves' conduct throughout and after the war. While officially lauded for their martial prowess, internal reports criticize instances of excessive violence against civilian populations and suspected cultists, contributing to strained relations with the Inquisition. These tensions culminated in covert inquiries into the chapter's adherence to Imperial doctrine, raising questions about the balance between martial effectiveness and ideological compliance. The results of these inquiries remain classified but influence subsequent protocols governing Space Wolves deployments. Among the Imperial command, the situation demanded increasingly bold measures. The decision to concentrate resources on a final, coordinated counter-offensive was not taken lightly. Intelligence from the Adeptus Astra Telepathica indicated that Angron's presence on the planet was creating unstable warp conditions that could be exploited. By timing a multi-pronged assault to coincide with a predicted fluctuation, the defenders aimed to force the Daemon Primarch into a position where the Grey Knights could engage him directly. The plan required precise synchronization and offered no guarantee of success, but it was deemed the only viable course of action to break the siege. This expanded segment deepens the chronology of Armageddon's origins, biology of defenders implied by hardships, military tactics, shock and demonic evasion, recruitment of elite units, and social structure amid collapse. Technology remains implied in warp-driven weapons and teleportation. Logistics faltered under siege. Angron and Logan emerge as key figures, Grey Knights and Space Wolves as famous units. Behavioral instincts, loyalty, sacrifice, suppression shape ritual ethics. Divisions between military pragmatism and bureaucratic secrecy drove final outcomes. Mechanicus survey data notes the emergence of multiple warp rifts across the planet's surface beginning on day 12. These events coincided with increased demon activity, presenting hazards both to human defenders and to planetary systems reliant on stable environmental controls. The Adeptus Mechanicus implemented containment protocols, sealing off affected industrial sectors and rerouting power to unaffected areas. In the official record, these measures are described as partially effective, though unverified accounts suggest that several sealed zones were entirely overrun and remain inaccessible to this day. In this grinding war of attrition, leadership decisions carried weight far beyond the immediate battle. The Planetary Defense Force commanders, in coordination with the Space Wolves, prioritized the defense of vital water purification plants and atmospheric processors. Losing these would have rendered entire hive cities uninhabitable within days, forcing mass evacuations and collapsing defensive lines. This strategy meant that less vital regions, though still populated, were sometimes sacrificed to concentrate strength where it mattered most. Such choices, while effective militarily, sowed resentment among civilians abandoned to chaos control, resentment that could not be addressed during the conflict. By the third week, administratum casualty rolls document the loss of over 1/3 of the active planetary defense regiments. Armor divisions were particularly affected, with operational numbers reduced to less than half their pre-invasion strength. Replacement vehicles were constructed in emergency foundries overseen by Mechanicus engine seers, but the rate of production was insufficient to offset the losses. Reinforcement fleets from the Segmentum Solar were delayed by continuing warp storms, arriving later than the original projections. The second month of the conflict saw the consolidation of Imperial defensive positions. Administratum charts show that Hive Hell's Reach, Hive Death Mire, and Hive Tempestora became primary fortresses, with multiple regiments committed to each. The Space Wolves maintained a mobile defense pattern, striking at vulnerable enemy concentrations to delay their advance. The Planetary Defense Force shifted to a strategy of layered fortification, supported by Mechanicus-installed macro turrets and graviton mines in urban choke points. Despite these measures, administratum casualty rolls increased steadily, with daily losses averaging 40 to 50,000 personnel. Administratum reports record multiple attempts to retake Sector Helma, the location of the initial enemy landing. All such efforts were unsuccessful, and by day 65 the sector was officially classified as unrecoverable. Mechanicus survey drones dispatched to map the area were either destroyed or failed to transmit. Surviving picked captures display large-scale terrain deformation, presence of demonic warp entities, and industrial structures reshaped into non-Euclidean configurations. These images were archived under the highest security classification. The Inquisition archives also exposed the use of extreme measures employed to contain the war's fallout. Mass sterilizations, forced relocations, and the execution of suspected cultists and sympathizers went far beyond the Administratum's sanitized reports. In many cases, entire hive city sectors were purged with incendiary ordnance and chemical weapons to prevent further spread of corruption. These operations resulted in significant civilian casualties, which were officially attributed to enemy action or collateral damage. Such brutal policies reveal the Inquisition's prioritization of the Imperium's long-term stability over immediate humanitarian concerns. Significant among the suppressed records are accounts of covert operations conducted by Ordo Malleus agents during the conflict. These missions involved assassination of key cult leaders, disruption of warp rifts, and retrieval of demon artifacts. Several retinues operated independently of regular military command, frequently clashing with planetary defense authorities over tactical priorities. These incidents illustrate the clandestine and often ruthless nature of inquisitorial intervention, which remained hidden from public and even many Imperial circles. Furthermore, inquisitorial archives detail the long-term consequences of the war on Armageddon's population and infrastructure. Beyond the physical destruction, widespread psychological trauma and pervasive paranoia took root among survivors. Cult activity, though officially declared eradicated, persisted underground, evolving into more insidious forms. The Inquisition maintained ongoing covert surveillance and intervention operations for decades following the conflict, underscoring the war's enduring legacy as a battleground for soul and sanity. Internal reports also question the efficacy and morality of the Space Wolves' role in the conflict. While publicly lauded for their valor, the Inquisition noted instances of excessive brutality and disregard for civilian lives by the chapter's forces. Such critiques contributed to growing friction between the Space Wolves and inquisitorial authorities, foreshadowing future confrontations over control and doctrinal orthodoxy. This nuanced view contrasts sharply with the heroic narratives promulgated by Imperial propaganda. Finally, the archives touch upon the broader implications of the War for Imperial policy. The First War for Armageddon highlighted vulnerabilities in planetary defense preparedness and the limits of bureaucratic responsiveness to warp-based threats. It prompted revisions in Adeptus Mechanicus warp monitoring protocols, the expansion of Grey Knight's deployment contingents, and increased inquisitorial authority over critical systems at risk of demonic incursion. These reforms shaped Imperial doctrine for subsequent conflicts involving demon primarchs and large-scale chaos invasions.